Okay, in this lesson, we're going to talk about fabrics and how to choose fabric for your project if you have never sewn before. So any pattern that you choose for apparel will have fabric suggestions on the back of the envelope. Does not mean that the fabric listed is the only fabric that you can use. They are suggestions. However, if you are new to sewing, you're going to want to stick close to those suggestions so that you are successful with your project. And as you gain more experience and learn more about fabric and what it can do, then you'll know whether or not it's going to work on a project if it's not listed on the back of the envelope. So as a beginner sewist, you want to start with a fabric that's easy to sew. And that generally means looking for natural type fibers such as cotton or linen. They are the easiest to sew by far. Quilting cotton comes in wonderful colors and prints. It is a higher quality fabric, so it doesn't shrink as much. In the US right now, quilting cotton prices are probably around $10 a yard or $12 a yard. It is a high quality fabric, as I said, and doesn't shrink. So you always want to pre-wash your fabric before you begin your project. And I wash all my fabric in warm water and dry it in the dryer as much as possible, at least for the cottons. Other fabrics, you cannot always do that, but cotton is definitely machine washable. The thing about cotton is that it's a narrow width. It comes in 45 inches wide, which is technically, if you measure it, it'll only measure about 43. If you don't include the selvage, sometimes even less, about 42. So you kind of have to watch what you're getting. I do not really recommend buying cotton quilting fabric from places like Joann Fabrics here in the US. The reason being for that is because they print their own fabric and it is an inferior quality. It will shrink more than a higher end product that you buy from a quilt shop. However, if you only have Joann Fabrics at your disposal, then it's a place to start, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that, but just be aware that it might shrink more than you're expecting. Some fabrics will shrink as much as 20% after they've been washed and dried, so it's very important that you wash and dry it first before you begin your project. So that's cotton. So let's talk a little bit about linen. This is a piece of linen I found at a thrift store. Has a lovely print to it. Linen has a wonderful soft hand and a soft drape. It is not as stiff as cotton, and it is a little bit wider weave, so you can see more of the lines and the texture in it. It embroiders very well. It sews beautifully and has a beautiful drape, a softer drape than a cotton garment would have. Linen is a little bit more expensive because of the fiber, and you can find it in all kinds of colors, solids and prints. Generally, it's easier to find in the summer season than the winter season. It is very comfortable to wear, of course, like cotton is. And if you're looking in the fabric shops, towards the end of the summer is a great time to buy linen at a good price before the end of the season. Linen is recommended that you have it dry cleaned. And personally, I don't do that. I wash mine in cool water and just tumble dry a little bit on low, and then I hang it to dry the rest of the way. And I haven't had any issues with it. But most linen will say that it is a dry clean only fabric. So just be careful. If you are going to dry clean it, you may want to have it dry cleaned first before you cut your pattern out of it, so that you won't have any shrinkage problems down the line. But it is good to sew with, especially if you're a beginner. Let's talk a little bit about rayon. This is a rayon print, a digital print. Rayon is a little bit thinner than cotton or linen. It has a very tight weave. It takes the colors very well. It's very beautiful, bright colors. Will probably be a rayon fabric. Rayon is made from bamboo, and so it feels very soft and has a beautiful drape to it. It doesn't breathe quite as well as cotton or linen when you're wearing it, however. but it is still easy to sew with. My biggest issue with rayon is that rayon can be poor quality and it can shrink a lot. It also can bleed in the wash. Be careful when you use rayon. Make sure you pre-wash it. Make sure it's not running on other items. I had a skirt that I made, a patchwork skirt, and I used a rayon fabric that I bought at a thrift store, and I knew it was rayon, but I didn't really think about color fastness of it, and I washed the skirt after it was all done, and this navy blue color bled all over everything in the skirt. So be very careful with rayon. Wash it on cold, dry it on low, or even line dry it. Rayon fabrics have creep. It's called creep. It means that every time you wash it, it will shrink more and more and more. So be careful with rayon. You can sometimes get into problems with that, and there's no way to know it until it's too late. Knits. Let's talk a little bit about knits. So for beginner sewists, I recommend woven fabrics, but once you've mastered that, you can move on to knits. So this is a rayon blend knit. It has cotton, rayon, and spandex in it, so it has a little bit of stretch and recovery. It's got beautiful colors. That's what the rayon does in that type of fabric. Gives it a beautiful color print, and it is fairly easy to sew as far as knits go. The problem with knits is that today there are knits that are so thin that they are really hard to control when you're sewing them. And I highly recommend you put your hand behind a knit in the store and look and see if it's opaque. If it is opaque, it might have enough body for you to work with it as a beginner sewist. Some of the fabrics that I have purchased from, let's say, Walmart in the knit area are very thin. They are hard to work with. They stretch out. They don't recover. And it can be just really frustrating. So stay away from that. If you're new to sewing, you want something that has enough body to it so it might stretch a little bit, but not completely stretch out while you're learning to sew and control the fabric. Once you've mastered that, you can get a little bit more creative and try different types of knit. The other kind of knit that I really like is a jersey knit. So this is a cotton jersey. It is more opaque, so it means a little bit heavier fabric. It's got a nice soft hand to it, but it's a little bit easier to sew. The other one I have is a Ponte de Roma, which is a heavier knit, more like something you would wear in the winter time. That is a really great fabric. It wears well, it sews easily, and I would highly recommend that if you're a beginner. I don't have a piece to show you right now, but that could be one that you might look for in the store. Well, let's talk about satin and silks. These, of course, are the eye candy in the fabric store. They are always beautiful colors. They are beautiful prints, and they are so very tempting for anyone who is beginning to sew. But they are difficult. We're going to have a whole section here in the group of sewing silks and satins and techniques that you need to use to sew the slippery stuff like this. Because of the way that the fabric moves, it is very soft. It is great for lingerie. It is beautiful for dressy blouses, dresses, night wear, all kinds of applications, bridal, of course, but it is a lot different to sew. So I recommend as a beginner sewist that you pass by anything that is satin and just don't even consider it in the beginning. So down the road, you can look at sewing a cotton silk blend, and that, because of the cotton, makes the fibers not slide so much. It's easier to control. So if you are ready to start with a little bit of silk, I would look for a cotton silk blend to begin with, and then once you've mastered that, you can try different techniques for some of these other things, and we'll have a whole section on that here in the course. Okay, brocade. let's talk about brocade. Beautiful fabric, beautiful hand. Some brocades can be very stiff. This one is a very soft one. It's got a beautiful coloration on both sides. A lot of times with brocades, we'll use both sides of the fabric for different things, maybe a collar or cuffs. It is hard to sew. Why is it hard to sew? Well, not only is it slippery and satiny, but it unravels. If you can see this cut here, look at that. It has not been washed or dry cleaned. It's been sitting in my closet for probably a year and a half, and look at how it has unraveled just sitting still. So definitely brocade takes some skill to sew because it is something that unravels like you wouldn't believe. And we'll talk about that too. We'll have a different section on that. That is also a fabric you probably want to stay away from as a beginner sewist. A couple fabrics that I would recommend that I don't have to show you at this time. Fleece is very easy to sew. It is a sustainable product because it's made from recycled soda bottles. It is thicker, and even though it's thicker, it's just easy to put through the machine. It doesn't seem to have the problems with things catching in the machine, and I have had very good results sewing fleece things. The great thing about fleece is that you don't have to finish the seam allowances. It does not unravel, and you can do some really beautiful decorative things, which we'll have projects on that later in the group too. But fleece is a great item for beginners. There are a lot of no-sew projects you can do with fleece just by cutting strips of fleece and weaving them together, or different things like that. So that's something to look for. We'll talk a little bit about wool. Wool is a more advanced fabric. If you're a beginner, I would recommend you start with some of these other fabrics that I have talked about, and then we'll get around to wool a little bit later on. The reason being, wool takes a lot of special techniques in pressing. It's not the sewing that's the difficult part with wool, it's the pressing and making it come out and getting a really nice finished look to it is a little bit harder with wool because it marks very easily on the right side. So that's the basics of fabrics. There are, of course, many other fabrics that I have not covered here, many specialty fabrics in bridal and activewear and that type of thing. And those are things that I would suggest you put off a little bit until you get the handle on some of the basic techniques that we have covered here in the group, and we'll have some more lessons on specialty fabrics down the road. That's all for today. We'll see you in the next lesson.